Okay. Okay, so good afternoon and thanks for joining this afternoon's review session. So as mentioned, this entire afternoon, we will be talking about the tax remedies under the NIRC. So I specified here that we will only be discussing the remedies found under the National Internal Revenue Code. So there are actually other tax remedies that relate to local taxation. So ang local taxation remedies is found under the Local Government Code of the Philippines, and your tax remedies under LGC or for local taxation will be discussed by Attorney Rosal when you reach the topic on local taxation. Okay, so since these taxation remedies are under NIRC, we must remember that these remedies only apply to national internal revenue taxes only. So only for national taxes. So we have enumerated naman this morning what are those taxes that are considered as national internal revenue taxes. So let's just refresh our minds. So we have the income tax, we have donor's tax, we have estate tax, VAT, other percentage taxes, then we have excise taxes, and documentary stamp tax. So these remedies only applies to those taxes that I have enumerated, which are considered as national internal revenue taxes. Okay, so here's a complete list of your remedies. So the remedies should be classified into two. So pangkinsa man ni siya nga remedy. Natay taxpayers remedies and government's remedies. So the taxpayers remedies are being used by us as taxpayers. So if we want to question or if we have any issues regarding the taxes that the government is trying to collect from us, if you want to question them, then here are your remedies. On the part naman of the government, diba, particularly BIR, wants to collect something from the taxpayer. And if the taxpayer will not pay their tax liabilities, then these are the remedies of the government for the collection of taxes. Okay, for the taxpayers' remedies, we have administrative remedies and judicial remedies. Okay, when we say administrative remedies, these are remedies that could be availed without resorting to courts. Dili ta kailangan mo file og case sa court. Adto ta sa administrative agencies of the government. So particularly BIR. BIR is an example of an administrative agency of the government. So we have two types of administrative remedies. First is before payment of taxes and after payment of taxes. So for example, if there is a particular provision of the tax law which is doubtful for you, murag galibog ka, applicable ba ni nako or dili? For example, naigilista dito nga exempt from taxes. And nagduha ka kung appeal ba ka dito sa enumerate nga mga classifications, naglibog ka, pwede ka mo fall under the exception, pero murag na gray area nga makaingon ka nga basin dili sad ko mo fall sa exemption. So para sure, you can ask the BIR for an opinion. So you can secure a BIR ruling or opinion. So the BIR will send you an interpretation of the tax law that you are doubtful, and then BIR will say nga, oh yes, kanang you are under the exempt entities for this tax, or dili ka exempt, so kailangan ka mo pay og tax. So that's one remedy that you can avail before actual payment of tax. You can protest with request for either reconsideration or reinvestigation. So for example, if BIR sends you an assessment, no, saying there nga, na ako no kay deficiency tax of this much, kunya di ka mo sugot, di ka mo agree nga, pero naman ko'y deficiency tax nga, di bayad mo kog sakto. So you can protest before paying the assessed amount of the tax. No, ibutang man na dito sa assessment ni BIR na mao ni ang amount. So kung dili ka mo agree sa amount, so do not pay it yet. You can file a protest with request for reconsideration or reinvestigation. Or you can also ask for a compromise or abatement. So compromise meaning pagamyan nimo ang tax, muhangyo ka nga pwede pagamyan, or i-abate jud pasabot is totally wag tangon jud ang imong tax liability. So you can ask for these remedies. So these remedies kaning tulo are only administrative remedies. Therefore, you can ask these from the BIR without resorting to the courts. Then after payment, if you already paid your tax, you still have some remedies. If you think that the tax that you have paid is excessive, then you can ask for a refund. Or nag-overpay kag tax, you can ask for a tax credit. And the BIR will give you a tax credit certificate. You can amend your tax return within 3 years from submission, provided there is no investigation or audit or assessment yet. So for example, ni-file kag imong income tax return and then later on, you realize that naakay sayop sa imong computation dito sa imong income tax return. So you can change it or you can amend, you can file an amended income tax return within 3 years from submission. But there is a condition. You can only amend if you are not investigated or assessed yet. Because even if wala pa nahuman ang 3-year period to amend, but if nakadawat ka og investigation or if you're being subjected to an investigation by the BIR, you cannot amend it anymore. You cannot amend it. Okay. And then you also have judicial remedies. So judicial remedies may be a civil action or a criminal action. Okay. First is you can appeal to the CTA. So for example, there is a BIR, of course, if I were to give you an advice, ani kasugod sa administrative daan kay dili siya hassle kay di ka kailangan magkuan og lawyer, no? If you are confident that you know the tax laws, pwede ra ka walay lawyer ana. And then you need not pay for filing fees, gamay ra imong gasto. So if ever di ka kakuha sa imong desired outcome diri sa BIR nga level, sa administrative level, then you can appeal their decision to the CTA. So if naay di gyapon mo magkasinabot sa BIR, no, even if ni-file na kag protest, di gyapon mo magkasinabot, so you may now bring your case to the courts. You can appeal to the CTA, Court of Tax Appeals. And then you can secure an injunction order from the CTA. Remember this morning I mentioned nga one of the implications of the lifeblood theory is that no injunction, diba? No injunction may be issued for the collection of taxes. But there is actually an exception to that. Under the law creating the CTA, the Court of Tax Appeals, there is one instance wherein a taxpayer could secure an injunction order. Ang sa ining injunction, murabag ipastop nimo ang BIR from collecting. There is one instance there. Under the law, only one instance, and there is a particular requirement for you to secure this injunction order. And then if you did not still get your desired outcome from the CTA division, this is CTA division, so you can appeal. You can file a motion for reconsideration from the CTA division to the CTA and bank. And then if you still couldn't win sa City and Bank, you can appeal further to the Supreme Court. And you can also contest the forfeiture of any chattel. So if naagi panguha nga mga personal properties nagi forfeit, CBIR nga personal properties nimo, and you want to question the forfeiture of these properties, you can ask the court to nullify the forfeiture. And then action for damages, you can ask the court to render judgment against BIR kay murag nahasol ka tungod sa incompetency baron sa BIR, so mangayo ka og damages. And aside from that, you can also file a criminal case against the erring BIR officials and employees. So for example, you know nga you are paying your taxes religiously, and then the BIR officials kay gisendan kag assessment kay para tagaan nimo sila mga under the table nga mga bayad, so you can file a criminal case against them. Then as to the government's remedies for the collection of taxes, pwede gihapon administrative, pwede sa judicial. So basta administrative, diri ra gyud sa administrative agency, which is the BIR. So it could enforce a tax lien. The specific procedures for these remedies we will discuss later. So kani siya overview lang sa. So ang step by step later atong tanaw. Distraint of personal property and garnishment of bank deposits, levy of real property, forfeiture of property, compromise and abatement, penalties, the imposition of penalties and fines, and the suspension of business operations. So if di jud ka mo bayad, or especially sa VAT, naate oplan kandado, so kandaduhan jud ang inyong business, suspension of business operations. And then BIR could also file a case against you if di jud ka mo bayad. Could be an ordinary civil action through a tax collection suit filed in court, and the BIR can also ask the court for a whole departure order for erring taxpayers ni siya, taxpayers. So, for example, ang kaning whole departure order kana bang dili ka sugtan nga molarga sa lain nga country. Kung dili nimo bayaran ang imuhang existing tax liability. And then BIR could also file a criminal case against you. There is only one instance wherein non-payment of tax will not result to an imprisonment, and that is only for non-payment of poll tax, right? All other taxes, if dili ka mabayad, you may be subjected to a criminal case and you may be imprisoned. Okay, so kadaghan naman ta nakadungog aning assessment, diba? So as I've mentioned this morning, assessment here in the NIRC, legal perspective, this is not, actually this is both a verb and a noun. Verb in a sense that it is an act of BIR in assessing deficiency taxes. But at the same time, it is also a noun because it could refer to the document given by the BIR to you as the deficient taxpayer. So this is the procedural due process in tax assessments. BIR should follow these steps carefully. Otherwise, you as the taxpayer could ask that the assessment be nullified. Void na inyong assessment kay wala mo ni follow ani nga steps. Okay, so step 1. There should be a letter of authority or LOA and tax audit. Okay. So letter of authority, what is this? This is an official document that empowers a revenue officer to examine and scrutinize the taxpayer's books of accounts and other accounting records in order to determine the taxpayer's correct internal revenue tax liabilities. So, diba, imagine na sa office sa BIR, naman tayo mga revenue officers din ha. So before ang isa ka revenue officer mahatagan o maka-acquire og right to investigate you or your business, that revenue officer should possess a LOA or letter of authority. Without LOA, mahulog nga illegal ang iyahang pag-investigate sa imuhang business. So as a general rule, the issuance of a LOA or letter of authority is a mandatory statutory requirement. Any tax assessment issued without a LOA is a violation of the taxpayer's right to due process and is therefore inescapably void. Mere letter of notice is not enough. So if ang ilahang ipakita sa inyo is letter of notice, tando-tando lang mo, and then eventually ask the assessment to be nullified because of the absence of LOA. So as a general rule, LOA is a mandatory requirement. Exception: the following cases need not be covered by a valid LOA. First, cases involving civil or criminal tax fraud, which fall under the jurisdiction of the Tax Fraud Division of the Enforcement Services. So, katunan yung mga dinagko na ni siya because dili tanan nga businesses no ma-fall under the investigation of the Tax Fraud Division. So, the Tax Fraud Division of the BAR is tasked to investigate kaning mga big tax fraud cases. So, if your business is being subjected to investigation by the Tax Fraud Division of the Enforcement Services, then the LOA, the requirement of LOA, may be dispensed with. No, pwede ra wala. And policy cases under audit by the special teams in the national office. So any other cases that are handled by the special teams. So kung essentially kaning mga exception mga yung nga for exceptional cases lang jud kay yung mga dinagko nga cases, mga special cases. But if ikaw uyamot ka nga businessman and then at this all of a sudden giingnan ka sa BIR nga i-assess daw kuno kanila kay you are not paying correct taxes. So the revenue officer, ang person no, ang officer dira sa BIR nga mo investigate nimo should have a LOA, letter of authority. And then after that, there should be a tax audit conducted. So once mapakita na nila nga na sila LOA, now they can now proceed to the conduct of the audit. So tax audit is the process of examining tax map is different. Tax map is different. Tax map is siya og administrative lang na siya nga og dili siya investigation ha ang tax mapping. Dili na siya part sa investigation. So lahi gyud na sila. Ang kanang LOA is only if ila jung specify nga i-investigate kanila. Ang kanang tax mapping is more mag-roam around raman na sila di ba sa place unya tan-aw nila na sila yung mga checklist dira if na-comply ka then ilang ibutang dito sa imuhang door baron na you have been tax map. But ang kanang sa investigation jud kay mangita na sila og list tan-aw nila ang lista dira sa kanang mga businesses within the area nga feel nila nga ganahan nila i-audit. So usually ang ma-auditan jud ani is mga dagko nga kining businesses. Okay? Kung gagmay ra gud nga businesses murag masayang ang ilang effort because magbayad, di ba, magbayad pa sila sa ilang mga tax auditors and then if gamay siya nga business, obviously gamay sa di mo makollect na tax ana. So they would want to collect bigger taxes, so therefore ang ilang i-investigate is mga dagko ra pud nga kuan nga mga businesses. Is the LOA prepared by the No. Okay. Ano man siya? If you look at the tax code, ang nagyoy authority to assess is the Commissioner of Internal Revenue. Diba? So, natay BIR. BIR meaning national yun nga BIR. Then, kay naman tay daghan nga mga districts, so natay mga revenue districts. Mga RDOs, diri sa atong tagsa-tagsa nga mga lugar. Then, based sa NIRC, si CIR will be the one to issue assessments. But si Commissioner of Internal Revenue, usara man na siya, di ba? Siya man jud ang head sa tibok PIR. So, he cannot assess every taxpayer. So, tagaan niya o kumaga authority ang mga revenue officers sa tagsa-tagsa nga mga lugar para mo make sa assessment. So, si Commissioner of Internal Revenue, in theory, siya jud ang mo-sign sa LOA. Siya ang mohatag og authority sa revenue officer to investigate. So, kanang LOA mo nang bitbiton sa ato ang revenue officers, inig start nila sa investigation. Okay, para mapakita niya sa taxpayer nga, I am authorized. I'm authorized by the BIR to conduct this investigation. Okay, so proceed na siya sa tax audit. This is the process of examining, going over, or scrutinizing the books and records of the taxpayer to ascertain the correctness of the tax declared and paid by the taxpayer. So, a revenue officer is allowed only 120 days from the date of receipt of a LOA by the taxpayer to conduct the audit and submit the required report of investigation. If the revenue officer is unable to submit his final report of investigation within the 120-day period, he must then submit a progress report to his head of office and surrender the LOA for revalidation. So therefore, na the expiry date si LOA. 120 days ra ang iyahang. Does that mean that the regional director of BIR can issue the LOA but also signed by the BIR commissioner? So yes, pwede sad. Okay, para madali ra ang process because eventually na magutay gitawag nga agency theory in a sense nga mura pag principal and agent, and then the agent is the agent can perform whatever powers that the principal has. So, para dili na kaayo dugay ang pag-issue sa LOA, yes, the regional director can also issue the LOA on behalf of the BIR commission. Okay, so the LOA is good only for 120 days. So, if ikaw si revenue officer, you have 120 days to do your tax audit. Now, what if kuwangan ra ang 120 days? After 120 days, wala pa jud ka na human. So, mo ano yung mabuhaton, submit a progress report and surrender the LOA for revalidation para mo siya ipa-renew nimo for another 120 days. After this, so imagine yourself being the revenue officer, no? Bit-bit na ka sa imong LOA, and then nag-field work na ka, no? Ito na ka sa office sa taxpayer. Yeah, you conducted the audit na, and then nanakay initial report. So after mo na din si step 2. We have to conduct informal conference. After the initial report, ang kaning initial report nimo, this came from your tax audit, di ba? After the initial report on the tax audit, the taxpayer will decide whether he agrees with it or not. If he does not agree, he shall be informed on how much is his deficiency taxes. Then they will proceed with the informal conference so he can present his side. So, for example, ako inyong i-assess, kamo yung mga revenue officers, kamo ang mga sharks, no, ni-atake na ako. Unya, based sa inyong tax audit, na ako yung aning deficiency tax. So, inyo ko i-inform nga, oy, based sa mo ang tax audit, mo ni ang report, na kin ani nga deficiency taxes, kay mo ni ang supporting computation o ang VAT output nimo kay inaani supposedly pero ang imuhang gi-report kay inaani ra and so on. If ako man kung di ko mutuuan na kay murag di na reliable ang inyong audit, oy di ko mutuuan na. So We will now proceed with the informal conference. So me as a taxpayer can also present my side. Now, based on Revenue Regulation 22-2020, ang kaning notice of informal conference is now being replaced with notice of discrepancy. But in essence, the concept behind these is the same. So it's just that nag-change lang of terminology. Instead of notice of informal conference, this is now referred to as notice of discrepancy. So taxpayer must respond to the notice of discrepancy within 5 days from the receipt thereof. If he needs more time to submit the documents in his defense, he may submit them after discussion, but within 30 days from the receipt of the notice of discrepancy. The discussion shall not extend beyond the 30-day period. Ang pasabot aning 30-day period is 30 days from the receipt of the notice of discrepancy. Okay, so ang mahitaboan ni is, for example, karon gitagaan ko din, ako si taxpayer ha, so gitagaan ko ninyo og notice of discrepancy. I have 5 days to reply. Then i-attach na ko dito akong mga supporting documents no nga. O mao ni di ko mo agree sa inyong assessment kay sa ako ang own computation mao ni, so attach ko mga documents. After ana mag face to face discussion jud ta. Mo nang time nga mo baron mo sa office sa BIR no. Usually ato man jud na ang meeting. So magdala ka dito mga ako si taxpayer. So magdala ko dito og ako ang mga documents. Unya si revenue officer siya, dalo niya yung documents na proof sa iyang computation. So magsabot-sabot dito, magsabot-sabot. So the sabot-sabot must be only within 30 days from the receipt of the notice of discrepancy. So after ta nagka-discuss, within 10 days from the end of the discussion, the investigating officer shall endorse the case for review and request for the issuance and approval of the PAN. PAN is Preliminary Assessment Notice. If the taxpayer is still found to be liable for deficiency taxes. So, di ba, nagsabot-sabot na ta, nagstory-storya na ta, muna niyang informal conference, kunuhay na, informal ra jud siya, kay magbisaya ra jud ka, mura ra mo magstorya anay sa revenue officer. But, ka nga, kuan man gud ma'am, nani man gud ako ang computation. Asa daw imuha, so inyo i-compare. Kung dili gihapon mo magkasinabot, so kung ato siya within 10 days from the end of the discussion, unya wa mo nagkasinabot, unya si revenue officer mo insist gihapon na naalagi kay deficiency taxes of this much. So that's the time that the investigating officer will request for the issuance and approval of the preliminary assessment notice. So nahuman na ta sa informal conference, wala man gyud ta nagkasinabot, adto na ta sa step 3. So step 3 is the issuance of PAN, preliminary assessment notice. So as a general rule, a PAN shall be issued if it is determined that there exists sufficient basis to assess the taxpayer for any deficiency tax. It shall show in detail, so unsay naa sa PAN, it shall show in detail the facts and the law on which the proposed assessment is based. So dapat comprehensive yun si PAN. Para ako, kamo nga revenue officer, hatag ninyo sa PAN, no? Tagaan ko yung PAN, ako makatanaw sa jud ko sa tanan details sa inyong computation. Unsay basis nganong inana inyong pag-compute. So as a general rule, dapat muhatag yun mo PAN. Tagaan ko ninyo PAN. Okay? Ako si taxpayer, so tagaan ko ninyo PAN. Otherwise, void na gyud ang subsequent nga mga investigation, subsequent nga assessment, subsequent nga collection. So, PAN is necessary. Tagai ko PAN. Kanos agani? Within 10 days from the end of the discussion, dapat na siya o PAN. So, as a rule, PAN is required. But there are 5 exceptions. Nga kaning 5 exceptions according to Revenue Regulation 18-2013, also napo ni siya sa ato ang revenue, National Internal Revenue Code or aka tax code. Nasa din sila dito. There are 5 exemptions to the issuance of a PAN. The NIC, or this time the notice of discrepancy naman ito, the notice of discrepancy and the PAN shall not be required in any of the following cases, in which case a formal letter of demand and assessment notice shall be issued outright. So bahalag walay PAN, pwede na kamo diretso sa final letter of demand and assessment notice, or FAN, final assessment notice, or formal letter of demand. It's just the same, no? So FLD o FAN. Pwede walay PAN, diretso na sa FAN in the following cases. First, the finding for any deficiency tax is the result of a mathematical error in the computation of the tax as appearing on the face of the return. So ang pasabot daw, ang cost lang jud nganong wala ka nakabayad sa insakto nga amount sa tax is because nasayop ka didto og compute, mathematical error. Na imbis imong gi-minus 1 million, ang imong na minus 10 million, mautong nidako ang imong allowable deductions. So if inana, pwede ra way PAN. Pwede ra FAN diretso. Then a discrepancy has been determined between the tax withheld and the amount actually remitted by the withholding agent. So, di ba, for example, if employer ka, di ba, mag-withhold man ka o compensation tax, no? Tax sa sweldo sa imuhang mga employees. So, ang imong gi-withhold, let's say 100,000, but ang imong actually nga gi-remit sa BIR is only 80,000. So, there is discrepancy between what you withheld from the employees versus what you actually remitted to the BIR. Okay, so kung kana nga case, PAN is not anymore required, pwede ra diretso FAN. Next, a taxpayer who opted to claim a refund or tax credit of excess creditable withholding tax for a tax period was determined to have carried over and automatically applied the same amount claimed against the estimated tax liabilities for the taxable quarter or quarters of the succeeding taxable year. So, for example, diba, ang income tax return ninyo, every quarter man is i-file. So, natay 1701Q or 1702Q for corporations. Let's say for quarter 1, mas dako ang inyong expense kaysa income. So, nag-negative mo, correct? Nag-negative mo. Mas dako inyo expense kaysa income. So, kung nag-negative mo, you have different options. Option 1, pwede nimo i-carry over imong loss to the next quarter para ang loss nimo sa quarter 1 ma-deduct nimo sa quarter 2. Okay, that's your first option. Second, you can ask for a tax refund. Kay mo naa kay imbis tax liability, tax refundable. Diba kay nag-negative man. So, you can ask for a refund. Or you can ask for a tax credit certificate. So, you can use the certificate as a deduction to your other taxes. Ang ingon diri sa letter C, niingon daw ka sa BIR na ganahan kag refund or ganahan kag tax credit, pero in essence, imo dayon gi-carry over sa next quarter. So, na-deduct na to nimo ang imuhang loss sa first quarter, na-deduct nimo sa second quarter. So, mura kag nangilad, madoble ang imuhang benefit, correct? Kaya imo naman siyang gi-carry over, nangayo pag yun ka og refund or tax credit. So, in this case, BIR will no longer be obliged to give you PAN. Pwede diretso FAN. So, carry over. Next. Excise tax due on excisable articles has not been paid. So, naman tayo excise taxes no, on liquors, on cigars, another sa inyong NIRC, kung unsa to nga mga products ang naay excise tax. And then the excise tax due on these articles have not been paid. So when it comes to excise tax, pwede raw walay PAN, FAN, diretso. Okay. And then lastly, an article locally purchased or imported by an exempt person such as but not limited to vehicles, capital equipment, machineries, and spare parts has been sold, traded, or transferred to a non-exempt person. So, for example, mura kag dummy ba nga? Ikaw ang nipalit, no, ikaw ang ni-import niya. Let's say, exempt person ko. So, if ni-import ko, niya exempt person man day ko, so dili ko pabayaran og VAT on imports. Okay? Wala ko gibayaran na VAT on imports. But then, pagkaugma, ang katong akong gi-import, akong gibaligya sa lain or akong gihatag sa lain. Kunya ang akong gitagaan or ang akong gibaligyaan, non-exempt siya nga person. So, mura ko gihimo niya nga dummy ba nga para wala siya mabayaran nga tax. Ako yung ipapalit kay exempt person man ko, but eventually dito di ay sa non-exempt person ang mopadong ang product. So naka-escape siya from tax. So mura siya o contravention sa ato ang tax law. Therefore, you will be assessed with a deficiency tax, but this time PAN is not anymore needed. Okay, so there are 5 instances wherein PAN is not required. Other than these 5, PAN is required. So therefore, kailangan na to matiman-an kung unsa ning 5 ka buok. Kay other kung ang inyong problem no sa ang inyong question, for example sa exam, wala siya kaning 5, that means kailangan jud siya og PAN. Kung wala siya PAN, gihatag void ang assessment. Okay? So unsa man atong timanan aning exceptions. When I reviewed for the bar, I think my mnemonic for this is pandemic. Pandemic. D. Akong okay, kinsay anay question dere? Kinsay i-assess sa letter E, si non-exempt person or si exempt person? Ang i-assess dere is si non-exempt person. Eh wala man siya VAT nga, wala man siya tax nga gibayaran. Siya may naka-benefit nga, wala siya nibayad sa tax. So, siya ang i-assess. So pandemic man to ako ang pandemic. So D, let me remember sa to kong gihimo nga D. Kanina discrepancy man siguro to akong D. So discrepancy between tax withheld versus tax remitted. D. Yeah. E, excise tax. M, mathematical error. I, kaning mga gi-import by an exempt person, then transferred to a non-exempt person. And C is for your carried over. Carry over ni mo siya. So pandemic. Si pandemic. So kung dili siya si demic, kung dili demic, kailangan na siya PAN. Another question. For notice of discrepancy, is the 10-day period after discussion included already in the within 30-day period? Wala siya ilabot. Ang 10 days in addition to siya sa 30-day period. So demic has of demic. So if the case is demic, pwede walay PAN. Di siya na PAN. So ang rule gihapon, general rule, kaundaan og PAN before mamaypay. So pandaan before FAN. Except for pandemic. Kung pandemic, mamaypay na lang ta diretso, no? Okay. So balik ta sa general rule. O sige, gitagaan ako niyo PAN. So what will I do if I am the taxpayer and I received a PAN? So I can reply to the PAN 15 days from the date of the receipt. So ang 15 days will only run upon my receipt of the PAN. Pagdawat na ko sa PAN, diha pa mo dawat ang diha pa mo dagan ang 15 days. Dili sa date sa PAN. Okay? What if 5 days after pa na ko nadawat, ang PAN. Nag-issue mo og PAN today, and then nadawat na ko siya 5 days after. So, the date of receipt of the PAN. Mao na siya ang period from which, or date from which, the 15 days will run. So, if I fail to respond to the PAN, I am considered in default, and the FLD or FAN shall be issued. So, kung nadawat na ako and then 15 days na lang, wala gihapon ko ni-reply sa PAN, then si revenue officer, pwede na siya muhatag og FAN nako. More bagay siya nga, kasi dili na din siya motubag, so tagaan na nato og FAN. If the taxpayer responds and then ingon siya nga he disagrees with the findings, the FLD fund shall be issued within 15 days from the filing or submission of the taxpayer's response, calling for the payment of the taxpayer's deficiency tax liability inclusive of the applicable penalties if the reply to the PAN was found to be without merit. So, if the reply ko, no, naman ko 15 days to reply to the PAN. Nakadawat kong PAN karon, ako 15 days ma-reply. Let's say ni-reply jud ko, tinuod ni-reply ko. And then in my reply, I specifically mentioned nga, dili lagi ko mosugot aning inyuhang amount nga gi-assess nako. So wala na ta nagkasinabot, di ba, daan sa informal conference, unya gitagaan ko ninyo PAN. Dili lagi akong kumusugot. So mo to ang content sa akong reply. So si revenue officer, basahon to niya ang kamo man ang revenue officers. You will then read my reply to the PAN, and then you will determine whether meritorious ba ang akong reply or not. So if dili, that's the time tagaan ko niyo og FAN. So FAN shall be issued within 15 days from the filing or submission of the taxpayer's response. So kamo, as the revenue officers, pagdawat ninyo sa ako ang reply to the PAN, namoy 15 days to determine the merits of my reply. If feeling nyo nga, wala, dili gid meritorious ang ako ang defense, then you can now proceed to issue the FLD or FAN. Okay? So, okay, warga punta na kasi nabot. So, step 4 na ta. Formal letter of demand, FLD, and FAN, final assessment notice. The taxpayer shall be informed in writing of the law and the facts on which the assessment is made. Otherwise, the assessment shall be void. So this is very important. So if you become revenue officers someday, make sure to include the law and the facts on which the assessment is made. An assessment contains not only a computation of tax liabilities, but also a demand for payment within a certain period. So natadere formal letter of demand and the final assessment notice. Now, diba, ni-reply na ko sa inyong PAN. Kunya, nihatag na mo na ko og FLD FAN. Unsa naman sad ang ako ang remedy? Unsa naman yung taga BIR na unsa man yung mga revenue officers mo insist man jud. So ako na pong i-protest. So what is being protested is the FLD FAN. You have to take note that the term protest is very technical. Dili ka pwede mo ingon nga, ni-protest ko sa PAN. Can you say that? No. Kasi ang imuha manggong pag-question sa PAN is not a protest. It's a reply. Okay? So basta PAN gani, dili pa ka mag-protest. What if excited kay ka, nakadawat kang PAN, nag-protest din ka diretso? So the filing of protest is premature. So it may be dismissed. Kay that's not the proper remedy. The proper remedy to a PAN is a reply. And when you receive your FLD FAN, that's the time you can file your protest. So here, the taxpayer or his duly authorized representative may protest administratively. So admin ni siya ha, administrative remedy ni siya. That means ang imuhang protest dili nimo dalon dito sa court, adto gihapon sa BIR. protest administratively against the FLD fund within 30 days. So katong reply to the PAN, pila to? 15 days. But pag protest nimo sa FLD fund, you have 30 days from the receipt of your FLD fund. The taxpayer protesting an assessment may file a written notice of for reconsideration or reinvestigation. So more discussion on this later. But essentially, if you want to protest, dili lang general in term protest. Unsa man nga protest imuha? Reconsideration or reinvestigation? Lahi man ang reconsideration or reinvestigation. Ang reconsideration is saying tanawa balik, not tanawa balik, without considering additional evidence. Tanawa ra balik ang atong records. Murag na kay nasayop da, so mo na ang reconsideration. Ang reinvestigation is you will have to introduce new matters. Reinvestigate murag magsugod og balik. Magsugod kag balik. So mas hassle ang reinvestigation kumpara sa reconsideration. But again, you have 30 days to file your protest. And then in your protest, you have to specify whether this is for reconsideration or reinvestigation. Okay? And then, so you will now receive a decision on your disputed assessment. So after nimo mo file a protest, this time, ang mudawat sa protest nimo is the Commissioner of Internal Revenue. So ang mo decide ani sa protest, dili na si Revenue Officer. Ato na, nisaka na ka. Ang diri sa PAN nga level, ang imuha pang investigating officer. But for protest, this time, higher na ato na kani Commissioner of Internal Revenue, CIR. So CIR will then decide whether to grant the protest or not. So kung tuo siya, convinced siya sa imong protest, then yang i-grant ang imong request for reconsideration or reinvestigation. But if not, iyang i-deny imong request, so unsa man unsa man akong buhaton, wala gihapon gi-grant ako ang protest. So if the CIR denies the protest, the taxpayer can appeal the decision of the CIR. Then asa man nako i-appeal? Adto na sa CTA. Adto na ko sa Court of Tax Appeals. Okay? So again, what are the requisites of a valid assessment? There must be no agreement arrived between the tax official and the taxpayer during the pre-assessment stage. And then it must be in writing and must state the facts and the law on which the assessment is based. Ako naman din na-discuss ganina. So we already know what is the difference between delinquent tax and deficiency tax. So just to recall, delinquent tax is when the entire amount of tax liability remains unpaid, while for deficiency tax, you have paid a portion of it, but then na lang kay balance. And then ang katong puwang nimo mao to siya si deficiency tax. Now, prescriptive period for assessment, diba? We mentioned this morning that as a general rule, taxes are imprescriptible. Makakollect siya anytime, except if the tax law itself provides for a statute of limitations. Ang statute of limitations, this is the other term for prescriptive period. Parehas na sila. Prescriptive period, statute of limitations, parehas na ha. Okay. So, hangtod kanus aman. As a general rule, within 3 years after the last day prescribed by law for the filing of the return, or from the date of actual filing, whichever comes later. This is based on section 203 of your NIRC. So naay 3 years the ICBIR to issue an assessment. Okay, to issue an assessment. So 3 years, asa man i-count ang 3 years? Na kay duha ka tuman-an. Last day prescribed by law, unsay pasabot ang last day prescribed by law? deadline. Okay, deadline. Or the date of actual filing, whichever comes later. Okay, for example, ang annual income tax return, ang deadline is April 15. So supposedly, April 15 mo count ng 3 years, di ba? But what if ni-file ka beyond April 15? So ni-file ka April 30. So April 15 ang deadline, but the date of actual filing is April 30. So kanos mo start ang count sa 3 years? Adto sa date of actual filing, which is on April 30, because that is what is later between the two. Later between the two. Now, what if ni-file ko sa akong income tax return earlier? Okay, April 15 man ang deadline. Kunuhay, so ni-file ko March 30. Ni-file ko og March 30, but ang deadline kay April 15 pa. Asa man magsugod og count sa 3 years? Magsugod kag count sa April 15 because that is the later between the two. Later between the last day prescribed by law and the date of actual filing. So imuhang i-compare whichever is later. So dapat mahatag ang assessment within 3 years. Okay, for example, naalagi siya ilowa nga gipakita nimo. Nag-go through na mo sa informal conference. But then naka-realize ka lapas naman day 3 years kaya ang iyang gi-assess sa kuha is pag 2010 pa man ni. Nya 2022 naman ron. Ang iyang gi-question ang iyang gi-question sa kuha is ang ako kuno ang tax nga gibayran pag 2010. Kuwangan daw na ako na ko'y deficiency. And then late na kay ko naka-realize nga hala 3 years raman di ay naaray 3 years CBIR. So kung 2010 siya nga tax liability, income tax liability, ano sa ang deadline anang 2010 income tax? April 15, 2011. No, kay ang April 15 is next calendar date, next calendar year, rather, next calendar year. So kung 2010 nga income tax, deadline is April 15, 2011. So let's say you paid on the date of the deadline. The BIR has 3 years. So from April 15, 2011 until 12, 13, 14. So 2012, 2013, o 2014. April 15, 2014, rakutob. Siya pwede mo assess nimo. Kanya karon man kanya gi-assess, pwede pa na, dili na. The claim has already prescribed. So, dili na pwede mo assess si BIR nimo. Bahalag na pa na siya ilowa, nag-conduct siyang tax audit. Pwede na nimo ma-question anytime. Na, uy, ni prescribe naman di ay ang assessment. Okay? So, 3 years. Except if natay FFF. Because this time, mas taas iyang prescriptive period. 10 years. Unya, ang recording point pa jud sa 10 years, dili last day of, dili deadline o dili sa actual date of filing, but rather 10 years after the discovery. So for example, 2010 to siya na issue, pero 2022 pa lang na discover ni BIR. Pwede ba? Pwede gyapon kaniya i-assess? Yes. 10 years from the discovery. Only with respect to these 3. False return, fraudulent return with intent to evade tax, o failure to file a return. Okay. So kani, di ba, ang 3 years ng assessment is from the deadline or the actual filing, whichever comes later. What if, what you can file? Like April 15 ang deadline, wala kay gibukat, wa kan file. So ari ka masud sa failure to file a return. Nya dili man na ma-trace ni BIR ko diretso nga, uy, wala din ni siya ni file. Dugay pa kay na niya may buon nga wala man din ni siya ni file. Diha pa niya na discover nga wala din ka ni file. So ang count sa 10 years will start upon discovery nga kani siya nga taxpayer, wala din siya ni file o return. Or fraudulent iyang return with intent to evade tax. Or there is the return is false. So from the discovery of the falsity, fraud, or omission, in the case of FFF, false return, fraudulent return, and failure to file a return. Okay, so 10 years, mas taas. This is based on section 222 of the NIRC. So general rule, 3 years, and then executive 10 years. Kani, you can say, bad faith. Collectively, we can refer to it as if in bad faith ka. If in bad faith ka, 10 years. Okay. So determining if prescription has set in. The important date to remember is the date when the demand letter or notice is released, mailed, or sent by the CAR to the taxpayer. Provided the release was effected before prescription sets in, the assessment is deemed made on time, even if the taxpayer actually receives it after the prescriptive period. So, unsa din nga demand ang iyang pasabot. Ang kaning 3 years daw refers to your receipt of the fund or FLB. So, for example, di ba mo, sugod makagpan, LOAP, dayon, NOD, then PAN, FAN. Pag sanyag LOA nimo, okay, within 3 years pa. Pag sanya o NOD nimo, okay, within 3 years pa. Pag sanyag PAN nimo, within 3 years pa. But what if pag sanya sa FAN, nalapas na og 3 years? Can you say nga, uy, prescribed na? O niya, maingon din si revenue officer nga, dili manggod kay pagsugod aning atong investigation, nasud pa man siya sa 3 years. Answer is, prescribed na. So, ang FAN dapat, ang FAN or ang FLD must be the one received before the 3-year period. Ang FAN iyang pasabutan ni, dili ang LOA, dili ang NOD, dili ang PAN, but the FAN. Okay. So, for example, let's say kato akong gi-compute ganina, di ba? April 15, 2014. Let's say ang date sa FAN is April 14, 2014. Nadawat nimo April 20, 2014. Prescribed na ba or wala pa? Wala pa. Okay? Because ang date sa FAN nasud sa 3 years, even though the actual receipt of the taxpayer is already after the prescriptive period, as long as the FAN is released, mailed, or sent by the Commissioner of Internal Revenue to the taxpayer on time before the expiration of the 3-year period. Okay? Then, the prescriptive period, since it is the right of a taxpayer to question the validity of an assessment, being a right, you can waive it. You can waive the statute of limitations. So, ambot lang anong agree sa ka i-waive no nga murag detrimental man siya sa imong part. But the taxpayer and the CIR may agree in writing before the expiration of the time prescribed in 203 to extend the period of assessment. So, ang 203, section 203 says, di ba, 3 years. But pwede nimo i-waive. May ka nga, okay, I know nga, I have a right nga 3 years ra jud, but sige lang mo, agree ra ko nga ang BIR mo assess na ko even beyond the 3-year period. Pwede na, yes, you can execute a waiver, but there is a strict requirement for that. So what are the requirements for a valid waiver under RMO 14-2016? First, the waiver must be in writing, and the following must be complied with. It must be executed before the expiration of the prescriptive period. So for example, ongoing na ang tax audit, pero 2 days na lang, ma-expire na ang 3-day period niya, wala pa mo nahuman sa tax audit. Daghan pa mo kagian, di ba? After tax audit, mag-informal conference pa mo, mag-PAN pa mo, ana. Nya, what if mohangyo si si revenue officer nimo nga, pwede imo na lang i-waive ang 3-year period. Then yes, you can do that as long as you have executed the waiver before the expiration of the original prescriptive period. So therefore, the date of the execution of your waiver must be indicated para makitaan kung nisud pa ba ni siya sa before the expiration of the prescriptive period or beyond na. Then it must be signed by the taxpayer himself or his authorized representative. In a corporation, it must be signed by its responsible officials like the president, in-house counsel, and so on, as authorized by a board resolution or your secretary's certificate. The expiry date of the period agreed upon to assess or collect the tax after the regular 3-year period should be indicated. Yes, natay question 3. Does the date of execution refer to the date when the waiver was executed? Yes. The date of the waiver jud. And then inyo dong i-indicate kung kanus-an na inyong new expiry date of, new prescriptive period. So, for example, March 15 man to no, 2014. Let's say, yes, I agreed, but only until December 31, 2014 ang extension. So you should also indicate this in your waiver. Except for waiver of collection of taxes, which shall indicate the particular taxes assessed, the waiver need not specify the particular taxes to be assessed nor the amount thereof, and it may simply state all internal revenue taxes. It may or may not be notarized. So the waiver, pwede ra walay notaryo, but most of the time, panotaryuhan. The CIR or Commissioner of Internal Revenue or designated officials or the concerned revenue district officer or group supervisor must indicate acceptance by signing the same before the expiration of the period to assess or collect taxes or before the lapse of the period agreed upon in a prior agreement. So dapat both parties will sign. Kaya here, di ba, signed by the taxpayer himself. Here, kaya dapat musign pod ang representative sa BIR. The taxpayer has the duty to retain a copy of the accepted waiver. Okay. So there are 2 material dates that are required on the waiver. First, the date of execution of the waiver by the taxpayer or its authorized representative, and the expiry date of the period the taxpayer waives the statute of limitations. So, kutobra, inaning, okay, masugot ko nga, mula pas mas 3 years, but kutobra dire, nga period. So, what is the effect if you were not able to comply with all the requirements that we have listed here? As a general rule, when a waiver does not comply with the requisites for its validity, it is invalid and ineffective to extend the prescriptive period to assess taxes. Exception when both the BIR and the taxpayer are in pari delicto or in equal fault. It would be more equitable if the BIR's lapses were allowed to pass and consequently uphold the validity of the waivers in order to support the principle that taxes are the lifeblood of the government. So, for example, in pari delicto ka nang you are both at fault. Ngano, ikaw si taxpayer, then si BIR representative, kamo yung duha nagtinanga. Both of you are in fault. Ngano wala ninyo na comply ang requisites. So it's as if, bad faith plus bad faith is equal to good faith. So it's as if valid ang imuhang waiver. Okay? Okay, so remember katong tulo ka F, false return, fraudulent return, and failure to file. So ang failure to file mo ni non-filing. So let's distinguish these 3. False return, fraudulent return, ang kaning non-filing, failure to file a return. So a false return contains wrong information due to mistake, carelessness, or ignorance. So here actually, ragwa dyan mo gituyo. Tanga lang dyan ka. False. So the deviation may or may not be intentional. So this is not subject to a 50% surcharge, except if done willfully. So kung willful, naa kay 50% surcharge. Fraudulent return, this is intentional. This is made with intent to evade taxes. So this is intentional or deceitful and is subject to a 50% surcharge. Non-filing, so failure to file a return, this is the omission to file a return within the prescribed period. The omission may or may not be intentional. So this is not subject to 50% surcharge except if done willfully. So only katong mga willful ra jud ang subjected to a 50% surcharge. Will the taxpayer be burdened to claim that it is not willfully done? Yes, but there are presumptions. I think I've included this here sa ako ang notes din he. There are mga presumptions nga intentional jud. Like for example, if ni-exceed ang imuhang overstatement by 30%, so it will be presumed intentional or done in bad faith. But kung gagmay lang kayo nga discrepancy, wala kaabot 10%, ana, then the taxpayer can claim na dili gid siya intentional and as supported by this one. Okay, suspension of statute of limitations. So, ang kasabot aning suspension of statute of limitations, di ba? We have the 3-year period and the 10-year period as the case may be. 3-year period for ordinary assessment, extraordinary assessment, 10-year period katong tulo ka FFF. So, kaning suspension is actually pause. I-pause sa ang 3 years or i-pause sa ang 10 years. Kanus aman siya ma-pause? When the CIR or the Commissioner of Internal Revenue is prohibited from making the assessment or beginning distraint or levy or proceeding in court and for 60 days thereafter. So if there are any special circumstances that prohibits the Commissioner of Internal Revenue from making the assessment, then katong period nga na prohibited siya to make an assessment, it will be excluded from the count of the 3 years. So ma-stop or ma-pause ang pagdagan sa 3 years plus 60 days thereafter. So for example, if the CIR is prohibited for 30 days from making the assessment, so mo-pause siya for 30 days plus 60 days. So 90 days tanan ang pause. After this, modaga na sa dugbalik ang pag-run sa 3-year period. When the taxpayer requests for a reinvestigation, which is granted by the CIR, diba? Remember, a while ago, I mentioned nga, when you file your protest, you have to indicate whether this is for a reconsideration or a reinvestigation. So it matters because if reinvestigation ang imuhang gipangayo, this will stop the running of this will pause the running of the 3-year period. So for example, ang deadline or ang prescription will set in on April 15, 2014. Pagka dawat nimo sa okay, stop. And then you what you call this? You filed a protest for reinvestigation after you received your fund. Pagkadawat nimo sa reinvestigation, pag-file nimo reinvestigation, this will stop the running of the prescriptive period. But if ang imuhang gi-file is reconsideration, ang pag-run sa prescriptive period will continue. Only reinvestigation ang makapas-stop. Next questionnaire, you mean sa overstatement miss kay ang deductions and expenses? Yes, over 30% imuhang overstatement sa deductions or expenses or over 30% ang imuhang understatement sa imuhang income. That is presumed to be made in bad faith. Another instance that the statute of limitations will be suspended is when the taxpayer cannot be located in the address given by him in the return file. But if the taxpayer informs the CIR of any change in address, the running of the statute of limitations shall not be suspended. So for example, inyo i-investigate ang si taxpayer. And then based sa iyang income tax return, ang iyahang address is Cebu. And then wala na siya dito, then wala niya gi-inform ang BIR na nag-change din siya address. So kay naglisod man ang BIR panginta niya, the 3-year period, ang pagdagan sa statute of limitations will be suspended. When the warrant of distraint or levy is duly served upon the taxpayer, his authorized representative, or a member of his household with sufficient discretion, and no property is located. So this is related to the collection, na actual collection of the tax. So ang actual collection of the tax, di ba, ang rule na to is payable in money man. What if wala joy money si taxpayer? Then the government. So dili pwede si taxpayer ang magbuot nga. Pwede yuta lang ako ibayad. Pwede car lang ako ibayad. No, dili pwede. Dapat cash jud. But if ma-determine ni BIR, wala jud kay cash, that's the time nga mo decide si BIR. Siya ang mo decide na. Since wala man kay kwarta, sige kuwaon na lang ginamo imuhang yuta. So kaning warrant of distraint or levy mo na siya. Paghatag daw nila, wala di kay property, wala sila na-locate ng property, so the running of the statute of limitations will be suspended. Nakadungog mo sa mga manok. Saba kayo sila, daghan kay manok. Anyway. And when the taxpayer is out of the Philippines. So kung di ka malocate, sumurag same rago diri sa letters. If wala ka diri sa Philippines, di ka nila malocate, so i-suspend ang running sa statute of limitations. Okay, so atong i-expand ha ang atong protesting and assessment. So remember these periods: 30, 60, 180, 30. 30, 60, 180, 30. So unsa man yung first 30? Diba? We already know that after receiving an FLD or fund, a taxpayer has the right to file a protest. Protest within 30 days. How? By filing a request for reconsideration or reinvestigation. I have mentioned this a while ago. So let's now look at what is the difference between reconsideration and reinvestigation. So as to nature, reconsideration refers to a plea for re-evaluation of an assessment on the basis of existing records without need of additional evidence. It may involve both a question of fact or of law or both. While reinvestigation refers to a plea of re-evaluation of an assessment on the basis of newly discovered evidence that a taxpayer intends to present in the reinvestigation. It may also involve a question of fact or law or both. So the main difference between a reconsideration and reinvestigation is the fact that in reconsideration, you will not present additional evidence, while in reinvestigation, you will have to present new evidence. Then as to the effect on the prescriptive period, we have seen this a while ago, diba? Reconsideration shall not suspend the running of the prescriptive period, while reinvestigation suspends the running of the prescriptive period. It shall be suspended only if the request for reinvestigation is granted by the BIR. So if wala gi-grant imuhang request for reinvestigation, then there is no tolling or suspension of your prescriptive period. Okay, then so we have 30 days, right? Then as to the counting of the 180-day period for CR to decide, this is from the filing of the protest. And then for request for investigation, this is from the submission of complete documents. So to make this clear, okay, 30, 60, 180, 30. So kaning 30, klaro na no? 30 days from the receipt of fund, you can protest. Now, imong i-indicate whether reconsideration ba ni or reinvestigation, correct? So if reconsideration, di na mga kailangan mo submit og additional documents, right? So skip the 60. Skip 60. Wala na ning 60. Dito naka sa 180. So upon filing, di ba, you have 30 days to file your protest. Let's say you opted to request for reconsideration. Therefore, you need not present additional evidence. Upon filing of the protest, asa ka mo protest gani, adto ka mo protest sa Commissioner of Internal Revenue or CIR. Pagkadawat ni CIR sa imong protest, specifically request for reconsideration, the CIR has 180 days to decide on your protest. Na siya 180 days. So ang pag-run sa 180 days is, paning kung reconsideration siya, is from the filing of the protest. Pagka-file niyo sa protest, the CIR has 180 days within which to decide whether to grant your protest or deny your protest. However, if your protest involves a request for reinvestigation, since there is a reinvestigation, you are to present new evidence man, di ba? So, dili sa mo decide diretso si CIR. You have 60 days within which to submit your evidence. Mo na ning 60 days. And then, you have 60 days to submit your evidence, after which the CIR has now 180 days to decide. So, kung reinvestigation, ang 180 days will start from the submission of the complete documents. Mo nang lahi iyahang counting sa 180-day period. Okay? So, 30, 60, 180, 30. Submission of supporting documents, katong 60 days, no, from the filing of the protest. So, pag-file nimo sa protest, let's say, request for reinvestigation imong pilion, dili necessarily nga, imo na dayong i-attach tanan imong bag-o nga evidence. You have another 60 days. From the time na you filed your protest or request for reinvestigation, you have a fresh 60 days para mo submit sa imuhang additional documents. So, this is only applicable if the protest filed is a request for reinvestigation, because a request for reconsideration does not need the submission of additional supporting documents. Kuha? So again, you have 30 days to file your protest. If you failed, nilapas na ang 30 days, wala ka ni-file sa imong protest, the assessment will become final, executory, and demandable. Okay? So, ano naman yung mga typo? Anyway. Okay, so what will the commissioner or CIR do if the taxpayer files a protest? Okay. So, okay, again, CIR is, a very busy person, no niya. Usara po siya, pwede nga naa siya authorized representative na lang ang mo decide sa imuhang protest. So, if it is being decided by a duly authorized representative, naa siya 180 days, diba, from the submission of documents if this is a request for reinvestigation. But if it is a request for reconsideration, he has 180 days from the date of the filing of the protest. Okay, so if your protest is being decided by a duly authorized representative only and not by the CIR himself, you can still appeal to the CIR himself. For example, sa kaning si CIR's duly authorized representative, wala niya gi-grant ang imuhang either request for reinvestigation or request for reconsideration, you can file an administrative appeal to the CIR, and then the CIR will now have another 180 days from the filing of the administrative appeal. But if you filed the protest directly to CIR himself, na katarang original 180 days. Okay? An administrative appeal to the CIR may be availed of upon the denial of the protest of the FLD fund by the CIR's duly authorized representative. Under Revenue Regulation 18-2013, There is no administrative appeal to the CAR for inaction by the CAR's representative. The remedy is to await the decision or file a petition for review to the CTA within 30 days after the lapse of the 180-day waiting period. Okay, so why is this relevant? Okay. So, gets na nato ning 180, no? So, 180, mo ni ang time within which maka-decide CCIR or CCIR's duly authorized representative. And then, after receiving a decision, you now have 30 days to appeal the decision to the CTA, Court of Tax Appeals. So, nag-decide na din, no, 180 days. Nag-decide na sa CIR. Huwag yapong ka nalipay sa decision. You can appeal the decision to the Court of Tax Appeals within 30 days from the date of receipt of such decision. Okay. Now, at balikan tani. Kani siya nga part. Kung ang ni-hear sa imuhang protest or ang ni-decide sa imuhang protest is si CAR's duly authorized representative. You can only appeal, di ba, pwede man ka mo appeal dito ni CAR himself. You can only appeal upon receipt of the decision. Kung makadawat na kag-decision, that's the time maka-appeal ka, correct? Now, ang question is, what if nilapas na ang 180 days, pero wala gihapon ni nag-decide si CIR's duly authorized representative? Can you appeal administratively to the CIR? Uy, nalapas namang 180 days. Wala gihapon siya ni hatag sa ihang decision sa akong protest. Can I administratively appeal to the CIR? There is inaction within 180 days. Answer is no. You cannot. Even if ni expire na or nahuman na ang 180 days, dili gyapon ka pwede mo appeal diri sa CIR daw. You can only appeal to the CIR if you received a decision. Then what's your remedy then? Wala man gyud gitagad imong protest na let's say 300 days na, wala gihapon. So what is your remedy? If I cannot appeal to the CIR, I can appeal directly to the Court of Tax Appeals. Okay? So you can appeal to the Court of Tax Appeals within 30 days after the lapse of the 180-day waiting period. So kung nilapas na 180 days, you have 30 days to appeal to the CTA. O what if 300 days naman, miss, nalapas na ang 30 days, no? Okay, 180 plus 30, ilaman, 210. Yeah, 300 days naman, wala gihapoy action, so there is inaction on the part of the CIR's duly authorized representative. That means dili na ko maka-appeal sa CTA kinalapas na pod ang 30 days after the lapse of the 180-day waiting period. Di na ko maka-appeal sa CTA. Di sad ko maka-appeal sa CIR. Kaya wala lagi decision. What will you do then? Your only remedy then is to wait for the decision of the CIR's duly authorized representative, because that's the time you can appeal to the CIR. Okay? Nakuha ra ninyo. So, kana siya, if ang protest is being filed sa CIR's duly authorized representative. However, okay, if it is filed directly to the CIR himself, and then wala siya ni-act upon it within 180 days, no naman siya 180 days, you have two options. After the lapse of 180 days, pwede na kadi mo huwat sa iyang decision. You can immediately file an appeal to the Court of Tax Appeals within 30 days after the lapse of the 180-day waiting period. So that's your first option. Let's say nag-count gid mo sa days, 180 naman, wala gid gitubag ako ang protest. Pwede na ka mo diretso og file sa CTA within 30 days after the lapse of the 180 days. Second option is bahalag nalapas na sa 180 days, muhuwat ra gihapon ka. Muhuwat ka sa decision. And then once maabot na ang decision bisag unsa pa nakadugay, once maabot na siya, you have 30 days from the receipt of the decision to appeal to the CTA. Okay? So, ang kaning 180-30, after 180 days, first option is to file immediately an appeal to the CTA. Bahalag, wa ka naghuwat sa decision. Nalapas naman 180 days. So, file na lang ko appeal sa CTA. But, pwede rasad nga, bahalag nilapas na 180 days, maghuwat ra gihapon ka sa decision. Once madawat ni mo ang decision, na kay 30 days to appeal sa CTA. Okay, so manang 30, 60, 180, 30. So forms of denial, sa imong protest, denial of protest through the issuance of a final decision on disputed assessment. So kung di gyapon mo tuman or dili gyapon convinced sa CIR sa imong protest, then CIR will deny your protest and CIR will issue an FDDA, final decision on disputed assessment. Indirect denial of the protest through filing of a collection suit against the taxpayer. Di ba? Mashock na lang ka na. Uy, nag-file mo kong protest. All of a sudden na may gi-file nga collection case dito sa korte. That means indirectly, the Commissioner of Internal Revenue has denied your protest. Or ni-issue siya og warrant of distraint and levy, or there is a final demand letter from DAR. Such letter is in the nature of an FDDA. Or instead nga collection suit, criminal action jud ang iyang gi-file against you. So that means gi-deny din nga imuhang protest. Or another form of denial, inaction by the CIR or his duly authorized representative within the 180-day period. So if wala gid niya gitagad imuhang protest within the 180-day period, that means iyang gi-deny imong protest. That is why, even though wala pa ka nakadawat og decision, you can already appeal to the CTA after the lapse of the 180-day period. Okay. So what are your remedies? If your protest is denied in whole or in part by the CIR's duly authorized representative, ako na nag-iingon ganina, you can appeal to the CTA within 30 days, or you can elevate your protest through a request for reconsideration to the CIR himself within 30 days from the date of receipt of the said decision. Okay. At ako na nag-discuss ganina atong RR 18 2013. If the protest or administrative appeal, as the case may be, is denied in whole or in part by the CIR, the taxpayer may appeal to the CTA within 30 days from the receipt of the decision denying the protest. Otherwise, the assessment shall become final, executory, and demandable. Okay, so here, mo na akong giingon kanina na if duly authorized representative, so you can appeal directly to the CTA, or you can appeal to the CIR himself, and the CIR has another 180 days to decide, after which you have 30 days to file an appeal to the CTA. In case of inaction, you can appeal immediately to the CTA within 30 days from the lapse of the 180-day period, or you can wait for the final decision. Bahala kung sa panakadugay. And then you have 30 days after the receipt of such decision to appeal it to the CTA. If na-deny imong protest, pero wala ka ni-file of appeal sa CTA, the decision will become final, executory, and demandable. The taxpayer is barred in an action for collection from invoking any defense that will reopen the question of his liability on the merits. The assessment is considered correct and may be enforced by summary remedies or by judicial action. The taxpayer may raise only questions of jurisdiction, collusion between the parties, or fraud in the party offering the record with respect to the proceedings. So, in short, kung wala ka ni protest sa denial kung wala ka ni appeal, rather, sa denial sa imong protest, then it will become final and executory. You cannot question it anymore. Okay, so that's it for the assessment. Any question? Okay, no question. So next, another remedy of the taxpayer is is related to tax erroneously or illegally collected. So in these cases, you can file a claim for tax refund or tax credit. So I don't think this is very much important to kanang CPAs, no, but ato lang paagian gamay. Okay, in these cases, you have a right to ask for a refund or a tax credit from BIR. So, for example, when taxes are erroneously paid, the taxpayer pays under a mistake of fact, as when he is not aware of an existing exemption in his favor. So, waka kay ba nga exempted kas tax, nibayad kag tax, o erroneously paid, pwede ka mo claim for refund or tax credit. When taxes are illegally collected, when payments are made under duress. Nagipugos jud ka, nagitiunan ka, bayre ko ani nga tax or else, anan. So, kana siya is illegally collected, you can ask for the refund or a tax credit. When a penalty is collected without authority, or let's say, katong non-filing, katong omission gani, failure to file, di ba, wala man to'y surcharge nga 50%, but di-asasan ka og 50%, nga ibayad resad ka, but later on, naka-realize ka nga, uy, wala man unta day 50% surcharge. So you can ask for a refund or tax credit. The sum collected is excessive or in any manner wrongfully collected. So imbis nga 1 million, 10 million imo ang gibayad sa'yo. So pwede ka makakuha og tax refund or credit. So unsa man ning irrevocability rule? Kato gali akong gi-explain ganina nga, pwede mo i-carry over sa next quarter and so on. So once you decide, you cannot revoke your decision anymore. So once you decide na imo siyang i-carry over, di na ka pwede mag-change sa imong mind. Ay, dili na lang din ako i-carry over, mangayo na lang din ko refund, bawal na siya because of the irrevocability rule. Consequently, a taxpayer is barred from securing a refund or a tax credit certificate for the excess amount that it has initially opted to carry over. So, when can you file a claim for refund or tax credit? Within 2 years from the date of payment. Lahi iyang prescriptive period, ha? Katong ganina, prescriptive period siya sa assessment. Karon kay prescriptive period for the filing of a claim for refund or tax credit. You have 2 years from the date of payment. Both the claim for refund with the BIR and the subsequent appeal to the CTA must be within that 2-year period. Okay. So, basta kanan jud sa BIR nga claim nimo o appeal sa CTA must be within the 2-year period. Unsa may difference niya ganina? Katong sa section 203, katong 3-year period, ang katong 3 years is the assessment ra kutob, no? Bahalag ang imong appeal dito sa CTA, sa CIR, and so on. Bahalag nilapas na to sa 3 years as long as ang fan was issued within 3 years. But here, sa claim for refund or tax credit, both dito sa CIR o sa CTA must be within the 2-year period. Mas strict siya. Okay. So here, I don't think this is necessary, but I mean, this is very much important ba sa accounting students. But same maghapon 2 years ang kung ang imong ipa-refund kay VAT, ug ang imong ipa-refund other taxes nga dili VAT, lahi sila o reckoning period. Kung dili VAT imong ipa-refund, 2 years din na, di ba, from the payment of tax. But kung VAT imong ipa-refund, 2 years from the close of the taxable quarter when the sales were made. Okay? So, muna atong timanan. More na ang kailangan timanan. So, 2 years from the payment of tax, if, for example, donor's tax, estate tax, percentage tax, income tax, 2 years from the payment of the tax, ang imuhang pag-file o refund. But for VAT, 2 years from the close of the taxable quarter. Next, another taxpayer's remedy is to ask for a compromise or abatement, di ba? Compromise or abate. Kung compromise gani, that means pagamyan nimo, mohangyo ka nga pagamyan nimo ang tax. But abatement, mohangyo ka nga i-zero out to jud imo ang tax liability. So kinsa man ang nay authority to grant compromise or abatement, it is only the CIR. But there are exceptions. If it involves 500,000 or less, then pwede ra i-delegate sa Regional Evaluation Board. Kung nilapas siya og 500,000 but wala siya nilapas og 1 million, pwede ra si National Evaluation Board ang mo-grant sa compromise or abatement. But if nilapas na jud, does not exceed man siguro ni 1 million. But if ni-exceed na jud siya, dapat CIR. Does not exceed, sorry. How much to compromise? Pila man ang pwedeng i-grant nga mura og discount. Compromise is discount. It depends upon the grounds for the compromise. If the ground nganong mangayo kag compromise is financial incapacity, ang pwede ma-grant na compromise is minimum of 10% of the basic assessed tax. If it is based on reasonable doubt, ang pasabot ani reasonable doubt ba yung tama? Murag doubtful man ni sa kuan sa assessment good sa BIR, pwede I mean moangkon mi nga nami kuwang. Pero doubtful mi sa computation. So kung nay reasonable doubt, you can ask a minimum of 40% compromise of your basic assessed tax. Okay? And these are the cases where compromise is not allowed. Dili na tanawon. It's a matter of reading. Okay, and then so here for compromise, you only have 2 grounds, diba? Doubtful validity or financial incapacity. So for doubtful validity, you have minimum of 40% na compromise. Financial incapacity, you have a minimum of 10% na compromise. Okay. Compromise, as a general rule, diba, may be granted only by the CIR, but there are instances depending on the tax assessed, pwede sa Regional Evaluation Board or National Evaluation Board. But for abatement, absolutely CIR only. Si CIR lang ang pwede maka-abate. Kaya ang abatement man God is ang cancellation of the entire tax liability. So the grounds for abatement are there are unjustly or excessively assessed tax, and then the cost of collection exceeds the benefits or exceeds the ang kuwang magud niya is 100 pesos lang. Paninglon pa ni nato, daganon pa ni nato siya, ayaw na lang kay hassle na. So i-abate na lang siya. Okay, so that is abatement. I don't think you can read this on your own, so ato na lang i-skip sa mas important nga part. Okay. So remedies, this time government remedies na taha, government remedies for the collection of delinquent taxes. The government can initiate collection either administratively or judicially. Ako nang gi-present sa table ganina, di ba, na ay administrative remedies na sa judicial remedies. And collection will only follow once the assessment becomes final and executory. Correct? Kaya if ongoing pa ang issuance sa assessment, di ba, kung na pa siya sa PAN nga level, o pa siya niabot ito sa FAN, protest, and all, FDDA, wala pa to, dili pa ka maka-proceed sa collection. Kuwaton sa ni BAR, nga ang assessment will become final and executory. However, assessment is not necessary before filing a court. Hala, nabali lagi nino, an action in court in case of FFF, katong tulo ka F. And then prescriptive period is within 5 years following the assessment of the tax. Okay, kanin, no, remember po din ninyo, ganina 3 years, 10 years, di ba? 3 3 years kung ordinary, 10 years extraordinary kung katong na bad faith. But ato siya is prescriptive period to siya sa assessment. But kung may prescriptive period for collection, regardless kung bad faith or unsa ba, 5 years ra jud, 5 years. Okay, 5 years from the assessment of the tax. So take note, it must be clear in your minds that assessment is different from collection. Assessment is the process of determining, no, imo i-determine kung pila jud actually ang deficiency tax, and then once it becomes final and executory, collection will then follow. Ang collection, ang prescriptive period is 5 days. Okay, kani kay assessment man ni siya, assessment may be made within 10 years. Assessment ni siya, but the collection is still 5 years. Okay. Sige. Administrative remedies that may be availed by the government is a tax lien. Basi nawa na mo no. So, balik ko na ko ha, there is a table. So, first, diba? Manataani, diba? Manataani. So, ari na ta, administrative remedies, enforcement of a tax lien, distraint, yan nasa siya, judicial remedies. Muna siya. So, balik. Okay, tax lien. A tax lien is a legal claim or charge on property, whether real or personal, established by law as a source of security from the payment of tax obligations. So, what is the nature and extent of such tax lien? When a taxpayer neglects or refuses to pay his internal revenue tax liability after demand, the amount so demanded shall be a lien in favor of the government from the time the assessment was made by the CAR until paid, with interests, penalties, and costs that may accrue in addition thereto upon all property and rights to property, belonging to the taxpayer. So mahog siya nga, if dili jud ka mo bayad after na ma-final and executory, gitagaan ang kag-demand letter, if di gid ka mo bayad, automatically daw si government naa siya lien, naa siya right over your properties, tanan properties. So, pwede niya makuha ang imuhang properties as payment of the tax that you refuse to pay. The lien shall not be valid against any mortgagee, purchaser, or judgment creditor until notice of such lien shall be filed by the CAR in the Office of the Register of Deeds. So, for example, if nakay property and then kaning property imong gi-mortgage to someone else, the tax lien will not be effected on the property until the lien will be registered in the Office of the Register of Deeds. So if na kay gi-mortgage nga property, ang imong mortgagee is safe from the tax lien. Dili siya mag-worry nga makuha ang property nga gi-mortgage. Unless if gi-record ni CAR ang iyang tax lien sa Register of Deeds. So how should BIR enforce its tax lien? Through seizure to enforce tax lien. And then, for example, if ang imuhang utang is only 1 million and what is seized is worth 1.2 million, any excess will be returned to you as the property owner. Okay, 1 million ramang ka imong utang ni BIR, 1.2 million man ang iyang na-seize nga property. So, the 200,000 will be returned to you. Next, what is the difference between distraint and levy? Distraint is a remedy in which the collection of tax is enforced on the personal property. So basta personal property gani ang gikuha ni BIR, that is distraint. If it is a real property, that's called levy. But if the personal property is in the hands of a third party, it is called garnishment. So for example, kwaon ni BIR ang akong car, that is distraint. But what if ang akong car, akong gi-pledge to someone else? So ang possession sa akong car is naa sa lain nga person. That is now called garnishment. But technically, ang garnishment is still a form of distraint. So, kailangan ba mamili si BIR, distraint or levy, or pwede rin niya dungan? Pwede rin niya dunganon. Levy may be made before, simultaneously, or after distraint. Okay. This is the procedure now for distraint. This is very very complicated. So basta ang ang common denominator lang here is the BAR should comply with due process. So when we say due process, dapat na adjay notice given, and then gitagaan jud og chance si taxpayer to pay the tax liability through cash before nila kuhaon gyud ang property. Okay, here, for example, they will make a list of the properties and then provide copies of the list to the following persons, then post a notice of sale. Mo siyang i-auction ang imuhang property nga gikuha sa BAR will be sold through a public auction. Same goes with levy, actually. So there is a notice of, posting requirement. So post a notice of sale within 20 days. Niya asa man nimo ibutang ang notice of sale sa entrance sa City Hall, public and conspicuous place, niya napadyo publication. Saan siya? I-post mo siya sa newspaper for 3 consecutive weeks. Then mag-public auction na dayon mo, and then ibaligya siya sa highest bidder, and so on. Okay, and then another remedy available to the government is the suspension of business operation. This is particularly to VAT. We have the so-called Oplan Candado. So failure to issue VAT receipts may cause for the closure of your business. And this is actually close now, here later. Close now, here later. So, bahalang dili ka i-inform daan, pwede nila i-close daan yung kanaduhan yung business before kanila i-inform. That's the power of the BAR. And then there are also judicial remedies. Diba? Ako i-mention kanina, pwede siya civil case, pwede siya criminal case. And then, if filean kanila criminal case, dapat within 5 years from the date of the commission of your violation. If not known, from 5 years from the discovery. So if ganahan kanila filean og case for tax evasion, they should do it within 5 years from the time you committed the violation. Otherwise, they cannot file a criminal case against you anymore. Another question there, Miss, ang excess na na-seize na property sa BAR, would it be by tax refund, tax credit, or return jud ang amount? Return jud ang amount kay namgoy kwarta nga gidawat si BAR. Gibaligya nag-public auction man, and then gibaligya sa highest bidder. Si highest bidder ni hatag og kwarta ni BIR. So nay sobra nga kwarta, ihatag jud niya, i-turn over niya ni taxpayer ang kwarta. Dili katong mga tax certificates kwarta jud kay naa may kwarta nga nadawat from the highest bidder. Okay, so kanino injunction rule, di ba? As a rule, because taxes are lifeblood of the government, so it cannot be there is no injunction allowed as a general rule. So no court shall have the authority to grant an injunction to restrain the collection of any national internal revenue tax, fee, or charge imposed by the NIRC. Yeah, mo niya akong giingan ninyo. There is only one exception. When, in the opinion of the Court of Tax Appeals, the collection of tax may jeopardize the interest of the government and or the taxpayer. The CTA may suspend said collection and require the taxpayer to deposit the amount claimed or file a surety bond. This is based on Section 11 of RA 1125. Ang kaning RA 1125, this is the rule creating the the CTA. So there's only one instance where an injunction may be availed of. So only, unsang court ang maka-issue injunction? Only si CTA, si Court of Tax Appeals. Kung si Regional Trial Court, even Supreme Court, dili pwede, no? Dili, bisag siya pa ang highest court of the land. Dili siya maka-grant of injunction for the collection of tax. Only the CTA. And only when, in the opinion of the CTA, the collection of tax may jeopardize. And then there is a corresponding requirement to deposit the amount claimed or file a surety bond. That's the time that injunction may be granted. Okay, so here, delinquency interest and deficiency interest is 12% per annum. Surcharge, this is a civil penalty imposed in addition to the tax required to be paid. This is 25% penalty. Ang surcharge is 25% penalty, but for FFF, remember ganina, 50% ang iyang penalty. Or this is also referred to as fraud penalty. Mani siya na, day sa notes. Presumption that it is willful. If there is substantial under or over declaration, when can we say that there is a substantial over or under declaration? If more than 30% under or over. So kung income, imong gi-understate para mo gamay mong tax, dapat nilapas og 30% before na ay presumption nga willful jud siya. Or kung expenses, imong gi-overstate of more than 30%. Then that will be considered as willful. So, unsa may effect kung willful? Ang prescriptive period mahimong 10 years, correct? Then ang imuha pa yung penalty is 50%, imbis na 25. Then compromise penalty, this is a compromise penalty is an amount of money paid by a taxpayer to compromise a tax violation that he has committed instead of the BIR instituting a criminal action against the taxpayer. So for example, mayon sa BIR nga, na-discover na mo nga nag-evade kag tax, we can file a case against you kay within 5 years pa man. Pwede, dili lang ko ninyo filean mo, bayad lang po compromise penalty. Okay, pwede na siya. But take note, if already filed in court, it cannot be compromised anymore. Okay, and then if there are cases involving fraud, it may not be compromised. Fraud penalty, o kabanatan ni 50% of the tax or of the deficiency tax. Okay, so that ends our discussion on the tax remedy. So this time, questions na may mga question. If wala, we shall proceed to our Q&A. I mean, katong ganina ba nga na ay mga multiple choice questions. Okay, wala ra. Sige, let's begin. Mr. Alvarez is in the retail business. He received a deficiency tax assessment from the BIR containing only the computation of the deficiency tax and the penalties without any explanation of the factual and legal basis for the assessment. Is the assessment valid? Okay. You have the same answers. Okay. Answer is the assessment is invalid. The law requires a statement of facts in the law upon which the assessment is based. Next, Mia, a compensation income earner, filed her income tax return for the taxable year 2007 on March 30, 2008. So ang 2007 niya nga taxes, we-file niya on March 30. On May 20, 2011, MIA received an assessment notice and letter of demand covering the taxable year 2007, but the postmark on the envelope shows April 10, 2011. Her return is not false and fraudulent. Can MIA raise a defense of prescription? Sige daw. Oh, varying answers. C, A. Okay. Sige, A. Na answer A. Na answer of C. A. Okay. So, answer is letter A. The 3-year prescriptive period started to run on April 15. Again, once ganito ang giingon sa section 203 nga reckoning point sa 3-year period. Last day of filing or deadline and the date of actual, whichever is later. So, ang actual filing niya there is March 30. And then, ang deadline is April 15. So, asa may later? April 15, 2008. Correct? So, ato ta mag-count of 3 years. So, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. So, April 15, 2011. And then, kung sa ganito ang rule sa date sa assessment, I mean, pag-determine sa prescription, the date of the assessment itself and not the actual date of return, return receipt, actual date of receipt. Even though we received the assessment beyond the 3-year prescriptive period, as long as the assessment was mailed before the end of the prescriptive period. So, ang end sa itong prescriptive period is April 15, 2011, correct? The envelope shows April 10, although we received it May 20, but ang April 10 atong basihan. So, letter A is the correct answer. Next. There is prima facie evidence of a false or fraudulent return where the okay, correct. So, where the deductions claimed exceeded 30% of the actual deductions. Next. The prescriptive period for the collection of the deficiency tax assessment will be tolled or suspended. O, atong gidiscuss ni ganina. Ano sa man ma-suspend? Okay, answer. Letter B, correct. If the taxpayer files a request for reinvestigation that is approved by the CIR. Next. Taxpayer A was required by the BIR to sign and submit a waiver of the statute of limitations on the assessment period to give the BIR more time to complete its investigation. The BIR accepted the waiver but failed to indicate the date of its acceptance. What is the legal status of the waiver? Answer. Ingon diri B, C, A. You have very answers. A, B, C. Okay. So, answer is letter C. The waiver is invalid. The date of acceptance is crucial in counting the start of the period of suspension of the prescriptive period. Because, paano siya, timan nilang ninyo, ang waiver man good, mura man siya og contract, no? Sa inyong law and obligations and contracts, di ba kailangan na ay meeting of the minds. So here, when you signed your waiver, unya, wala pag gibutang dito ang acceptance ni, date of acceptance ni BIR, then we can say nga wala pa yung meeting of the minds. So actually, kailangan gihapon, although, di ba, so my bad pod, ganina, ang ako rang gibutang nga crucial dates kay date of the execution of the waiver, and then second is the date of the expiry. But ang date of expiry could be a specific date, until December, whatever, or pwede siya number of days lang. So, okay, pwede na ko siya ipa-extend og 60 days. So, asa man isugod og count ang 60 days, dito day sa date of acceptance. So, kailangan siya gihapon i-indicate. Okay. Then, when is a pre-assessment notice required under the following cases? So, asa daw ani kailangan og PAN? Remember pandemic? Okay, this is tricky. No, tricky naman siya question. Okay, the answer is when the excise tax due on excisable articles has been paid. Ang na dito sa exception is has not been paid, but there has been paid. So, kailangan siya og PAN. Next. A PAN is not required to be issued by the BAR before issuing a fine on one of the following cases. Asa man ani? Ang PAN is not required. Okay. Letter B, obvious tayo, no? So, as long as maka-familiar na jud mo sa katong pandemic, sayo na lang niyo mga questions. Di na ka mailad aning uban kay it will not look familiar naman. On July 31, Esperanza received a PAN from the BAR demanding that she pays 180,000 deficiency income taxes on her 2009 income. How many days from July 31, 2011 should Esperanza respond to the PAN? Answer. Okay, answer is 15 days. Correct. Next. On March 30, 2005, Miguel Foods Incorporated received a notice of assessment and a letter of demand on its April 15, 2002 final adjustment return from the BAR. Miguel Foods then filed a request for reinvestigation, together with the requisite supporting documents on April 25. On June 2, the BIR issued a final assessment reducing the amount of the tax demanded. Since Miguel Foods was satisfied with the reduction, it did not do anything anymore. On April 15, the BIR garnished the corporation's bank deposits to answer for the tax liability. Was the BIR action proper? Okay. Answer is letter B. Okay. BIR has 5 years. And why can you say nga within pa na siya sa 5 years? Asa ba mag-count din yung 5 years? It says here that we received the final assessment, which is the FDDA, no, on June 2. Sakto. June 2 ang FDDA. So, ano sa man di ay mo expire iyang right to collect. Diba? After receiving the final assessment on June 2, unsa tagani ang remedy ani ni Miguel Foods, unsa pagay additional remedy ani niya? What if di gyapon siya satisfied sa gihatag nga final assessment PBIR pag June 2? Unsa man iyang remedy? Yung remedy kay to file an appeal to the CTA within 30 days. So, na siya 30 days from June 2 to appeal, which expired on July 2, correct? July 2, 2005. Okay, July 2, 2005, that's the time when the assessment will become final and executory. So, naay until July 2, 2010 for the BIR to file a collection, to collect the assessment. So, kay na-collect niya April 15 man, so that is valid. Next. On April 15, 2011, the CIR mailed by registered mail the final assessment notice and the demand letter covering the calendar year 2007 with the Quezon City Post Office. Which statement is correct? Answer? Okay. Find out. The assessment notice is valid even if the taxpayer received the same after the 3-year period. Di ba ako nanigingan kanina? As long as it was mailed within the prescriptive period. So, calendar year 2007, kano sa deadline ani? April 15, 2008. So, count mo 3 years from April 15, 2008. So, 3, 8, 9, 10, 11. So, April 15, 2011. Naka-mail naman siya pag April 15, 2011. So, okay lang. Bahala og na-receive ni taxpayer, ma-receive ni taxpayer beyond the 3-year period as long as it was mailed within the 3-year period. The submission of the required documents within 60 days from the filing of the protest is available only where okay, answer correct. Kung na-I request for reinvestigation. What is the effect on the tax liability of a taxpayer who does not protest an assessment for deficiency taxes? Okay, answer is letter C, correct. The taxpayer's liability becomes fixed and subject to collection as the assessment becomes final and collectible. Next, Panflex International Incorporated received a notice of assessment from the BIR. It seasonably filed a protest with all the necessary supporting documents, but the BIR failed to act on the protest. 30 days from the lapse of 180 days from the filing of its protest, Panflex still has not elevated the matter to the CTA. So, okay. What remedy, if any, can Panflex take? Nahuman na daw ang 30 days from the lapse of the 180 days. So, kaya di ba naman siya duha ka options? So, if wala na, if di na available ang first option, the remaining option is to wait for the final decision of the BIR on his protest and appeal it to the CPA within 30 days from the receipt of such decision. Next. Taxpayer seasonably filed his protest together with all the supporting documents. And it is already July 31, 2011, or 180 days from submission of the protest. But the BIR commissioner has not yet decided his protest. Desirous of an early resolution of his protested assessment, the taxpayer should file his appeal to the Court of Tax Appeals not later than okay. So, clear na dyan siya sa inyong mind. No? Answer is August 30 because you have 30 days to appeal sa Court of Tax Appeals. When a BIR decision affirming an assessment is appealed to the CPA, the BIR's power to garnish the taxpayer's bank deposits is suspended or not suspended. Murag nag-loading akong internet da. Sige, so what's the answer? It is not suspended. Since the continued existence of government depends on tax revenue. So you always go back to the fact that collection of taxes shall not be stopped. So dapat walay injunction. Dili siya mas makastop. So it is not suspended since we always go back to the lifeblood theory. No, it's not suspended since the continued existence of government depends on tax revenues. What do you mean gibawi sa CTA? My question there, what if gibawi sa CTA? What do you mean gibawi? Okay, ano siya ha? So not suspended. Okay, manifest assessment. Not suspended, no, as a rule, diba? It is not suspended. But again, you, as the taxpayer, has the right to ask for an injunction. Kato ganing akong gingon ganina. Kaya sa CTA level naman ni. Kung ikaw si taxpayer, sige, pag-raise mo ng appeal dito sa CTA, automatically si BAR can garnish, di ba? Bahalag wala pa na final. So it is not, the right of BAR to garnish is not suspended. Except if you file a motion for injunction. So, imong i-allege dito, ikaw si taxpayer, it will allege nga you will suffer jeopardy from the collection. So, ngayon ka nga, ma-jeopardize po, kung imo ning ipa-collect ni BAR, unya, nag-ongoing pa lang ang akong appeal, ma-jeopardize po. So, mangayo kong injunction CTA, and then, unsa may ipabuhat ni CTA niya, pa-file si taxpayer o surety bond. Para if in case, mapildi rin hapon siya sa CTA level, magamit to iyang bond for the payment of the tax. So, that's the remedy. Next, which statement is correct? The collection of a deficiency tax assessment by distraint and levy Okay, answer correct. Letter A, may be repeated if necessary until the full amount due, including all expenses, is collected. Okay, so that's the end of our discussion on tax remedies. So, do you have any more questions?
Not so far, Miss.
Okay, so if you have no more questions, we can end early. And I thank you all for attending this afternoon's review session. And I will be sending the link to the recorded reviews maybe tomorrow. Okay, mag-convert pa si Zoom and then i-upload pa na ako sa Drive. Okay, sige. Thank you so much and have a wonderful afternoon. Bye.
Thank you so much, Attorney.
Okay.
Yes.